Welcome to a movie bracket here on the Intercut podcast channel. I'm your co-host, Zachary Shevich, and joining me, he stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. It's Arturo Zurita.
Now there's a motion picture about it, so everyone will know.
Exactly. Christopher Nolan, a man who loves to assemble an all-star cast, and for our Christopher Nolan movie bracket, we decided to do the same. We're joined by not just Karsten Runquist, but Taylor J. Williams as well, a couple of our favorite YouTube buddies, to talk about Nolan. Thanks for joining us, guys. Let's start out the way we like to start a lot of these movie bracket podcasts, by talking about the purpose of the bracket and what we're diving into, and the subject at hand, which is Christopher Nolan back in theaters with Oppenheimer. He's built a reputation for himself as being one of our premier blockbuster filmmakers, our epic scale directors. Karsten, to you, what is a Christopher Nolan movie? What are the defining characteristics or adjectives or themes or just vibes that you get off of a Christopher Nolan movie?
I mean, in the simplest way to describe it, it's big, it's loud, and sometimes very confusing. That's what I think when I think about his movies. It's usually like the biggest thing that's playing in theaters when it's out.
Absolutely. Like I feel like you can say that all of them overwhelm you with various aspects of their telling, whether it's like just technically overwhelming or even the way that the story is put together. Taylor, how about you? Are there certain defining features of a Christopher Nolan movie to you?
Yeah, I think Christopher Nolan is sort of a man torn between worlds. I think it's sort of impossible to talk about him without acknowledging the reputation he's had over the years that he's sort of broken out of a little more recently, but the notion of dumb person's idea of a smart person. Mm-hmm. And that's of course a very like reductive sentiment, but it kind of makes sense when you look at like how he chooses his subject matter and themes of like time dilation and dreams and stuff, things that I wouldn't say themselves are like all that deep or philosophical in and of themselves, but he uses them as tools to scientifically concoct the perfect, gold standard blockbuster film. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is sort of why he has this like college dorm poster reputation. But I also think he longs for more. In so many of his movies, he shows his characters looking at like cubist paintings and post-war art, particularly Picasso in Oppenheimer. And I think he's sort of torn between making populist entertainment, blockbuster films, which he's so good at, and also making more, abstract work. And I think what he does with time and staggering different timelines is not dissimilar to how artists like Picasso sort of warp, logically, it's, why is this nose and profile on a face that's straightforward, whatever, but emotionally it makes sense. That's what I think Christopher Nolan is doing with time, which I think is a very calculated move on his part. Mm-hmm. And I think it speaks to him as this like exacting like scientific filmmaker in a world of artists.
Absolutely.
I think Oppenheimer's very much getting at that, and I think all of his films have this through line of the sort of alienation he feels like being this creative genius, so to speak. Alienation from his family, alienation from his peers, almost as though the very act of filmmaking is a duty of his. And that's what I think connects.
He carries the burden heavily.
Yes, exactly. And so I think the single defining Chris Nolan moment is that clip of him at the Eminem concert where, it's this very like normal thing. You would never expect Christopher Nolan to be there. And to his credit, like, he looks like he's having a good time, but he's just such a robot. He, like, can't function like a normal person or engage with it the same way everyone else around him can. And I think there's a real longing there that's buried in his films. So that to me is Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, Christopher Nolan, not a stranger to the occasional hip hop collaboration. You know his work with Travis Scott very well.
Well, not fully. I didn't get to hear it in concert.
But I want to return to that idea of like the stupid person's idea of a smart person, because that is totally, like, especially I feel like middle period, that became Nolan's reputation, because he has this habit of presenting these ideas that maybe like seem scientific or philosophical as if they're very deep and profound, when obviously there's only like a little bit of, or only an extent to the depth that he's able to present in the movies. And I've come sort of around on like my view of Nolan's, like, I guess, intelligence, the intelligence he puts into his films, and that I think he is like a very smart person, but he's
Absolutely.
like trying to communicate these ideas, as you mentioned, in these populist mediums, and reducing them down to ideas that might be palatable to wide audiences. So you have these films that are big pieces of entertainment and some of the most impressive blockbuster filmmaking that we have around, but they touch on pretty fascinating subjects and pretty out there scientific ideas. Like there's just, I really appreciate how he is sort of challenging, I guess, making empty entertainment, even if the entertainment isn't necessarily like the most political or thought-provoking in that sense. You know, Oppenheimer kind of, it shifts this or signals this sort of outlier for him, and that's the one film where it really feels like he's taking some kind of political stance, whereas he's been very apolitical even when he touches on stuff in like The Dark Knight. But it's interesting to see how he's, the things that have remained consistent throughout his films and the things that have changed. Arturo, there's different sort of like periods of Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker. Is there a certain section of his work that you maybe feel like you resonate with the most? Is it that middle period when he's doing a lot of the big blockbuster stuff? Is it early stuff when he was a little bit more restrained, or more recently when he's shifted to collaborating with Jennifer Lame and it kind of feels like he's reached a new level of cross-cutting abilities?
Leaving his boy behind and getting what's the name, Johansson. I like him right before the bombs.
Ludwig, leaving Hans behind, you were saying, yeah.
With Ludwig, yeah. I think right before he was doing all the bomb trailer Inception moments, I think he was reaching that high point. I love Memento Nolan. I like Prestige. Those are like my two favorites. And I agree. It always feels like Karsten was saying, it's the biggest movie that's going to be in the theaters, because it's like, this is the one guy who's the whole machine. He is the franchise. He is the item. He is like the entire thing for whatever he's doing. And I think that's why people put him to such an esteem. And to go off what Taylor was saying, I feel like the closest person you can kind of connect him to when you become so big is like a Spielberg, where people love you, but then people also like hate that they love you. So it becomes this thing like you guys were saying, where it's like, oh, he thinks he's smarter than he is. And then like recently you see everybody going back on their Interstellar watches, and it's like either the movie got smarter or people got more open to it. So it's like, again, ironically, this guy who does so much about time has this bit about time going with him. And if I may add another Eminem reference to go with it as well, as Taylor brought up, Eminem once said, you know, I made an album and you guys didn't like it. 10 years later, you called it a classic. So if you don't like this new one, just wait 10 years, you'll call it a classic then too. So I think sometimes with Nolan, it just takes some time, but he's endured. So I think he's an everlasting director for sure.
Absolutely. So let's start to get into our bracket. And the films are assembled in a way that I don't usually do. I like to go chronologically, but I've been peer pressured, I've been bullied, I've been mocked, and I've changed my stance. And I assembled the matchups from top to bottom in terms of popularity according to Letterboxd. So don't blame me, blame the users over on Letterboxd. We are going from the most popular Chris Nolan film, which would be Interstellar, to his least popular film, which is Tarantella. It might seem like it's larceny, but larceny is completely unavailable. Screened one time, I think it was at the Cambridge Film Festival in 1996. Lost to history. We won't be commenting on that, but we will be commenting on several films directed and occasionally written or produced by Christopher Nolan. We have assembled the 12 features he's directed, the one that he's got a story by credit on, and the 3 short films that he has publicly available into our 16 film deep Christopher Nolan bracket. A lot of great films here, a lot of interesting things to talk about as well. Why don't we kick it off with the first matchup, which is, as I mentioned, Interstellar versus Tarantella. Tarantella, a film that Christopher Nolan directed back in 1989. I think he was around 19 years old then, so a very early work, pre-film school even, and kind of a trippy vibes movie, shot in black and white. Taylor, I know you're doing a lot of work in short films now. What do you think about Christopher Nolan's statement piece?
I think my favorite thing about it is that it's so experimental for so much of it, and then Christopher Nolan himself shows up, and then as soon as he enters the film, he starts doing all this reverse stuff, and dropping a wine glass in reverse and cutting to it mirror image, and then as soon as he dips from the film, it goes right back into the normal sort of less Nolan-esque MO, and so you can see that early DNA even at 19, which is pretty impressive to sort of have a through line that tracks that far back.
Absolutely. Karsten, were you also impressed with his experimental eye at such a young age?
I was not that impressed. I was interested. I mean, for the same reasons Taylor said. Like, I think it's like interesting seeing him this early on, and actually, I'll give it that. It's like impressive that he's stayed so consistent at making no sense. But yeah, I don't know. I couldn't have as much fun with this one, which is definitely not his intent. But
I mean, it's definitely the amateurishness definitely comes through. But fun to see the roots of one of our big filmmakers. So I think we can agree that Interstellar should win that matchup at least. Let's go to a couple films that are in the middle of Chris Nolan's popularity. That would be Batman Begins versus The Dark Knight Rises, probably the lesser two from his Dark Knight trilogy. I don't think most people don't argue that either of these films are the best. Is there one from this group that you think should advance? Arturo, you want to start us off?
Batman Begins. I think there's a small but ever growing community of people who enjoy Batman Begins over The Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight.
The roots of the character.
Over The Dark Knight. I think there are people who really do like Batman Begins.
No, there definitely are.
Right, yeah, exactly. So I would also put it over The Dark Knight Rises because Rises is my least favorite out of the trilogy, personally.
Karsten, do you agree? Is Dark Knight Rises the worst of the three?
I would say so. I don't dislike it, but I do see what Arturo's saying. Like, I have a bit of a soft spot for Batman Begins for some reason. There's I like the way he does the early origin stuff. It feels I don't know. I did not see it when it came out at the time. I didn't really care, but it just feels so different compared to a lot of superhero movies even today. Like, there's some charm about it that I don't think The Dark Knight Rises really has. Yeah.
But it doesn't have Bane.
I know. That's the only thing it's missing.
Which is why we can hear the whole movie throughout. It's fun time.
How about you, Taylor? Any love for The Dark Knight Rises?
I gotta say it's also my least favorite of the three. I think we can come to a unanimous agreement here. But yeah, I don't know. I think, at least for Batman Begins, the one thing I think it has over the other two movies is the actual production design of Gotham City. It actually feels like
Talk about it.
A gothic fictional place and not just like Chicago or tie-dye. And I don't know. I get his approach to, like, you know, each movie's kind of its own thing. He wants it to have a distinct identity. Tim Burton did the same thing, but I do think it's just so, like, off-putting how much the landscape of Gotham changes across the three movies. And I do think Batman Begins is the only one that really, like, taps into its roots, for me at least.
That's true. I think that's a big reason why people love it, is because, like, he created it all in a soundstage, like, from the ground up, so you weren't really in another town. But it goes from, like, sewers and a train line going all over, and they're like, okay, we keep the train line as the loop, but now it's Chicago, and now there's bridges, and it's like, you know what, forget all the bridges. I think it was like Philly, now it's an island. So it does evolve a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will give The Dark Knight Rises this. I enjoyed it significantly more on a more recent rewatch than I did when I saw it many years ago. Like, obviously, there are some, like, bloated, ridiculous aspects with the characters. I'm not sure that the way it resolves feels like it makes sense or works in any way. But there are some really, like, terrific, fantastic set pieces. The whole opening where they are hijacking something from one plane to the next and, like, carrying the plane by, like, its tail is ridiculous. The whole moment with the football field collapsing behind Hines Ward is, like, one of the most iconic shots that I can think of. I just enjoy it. It's definitely campier and more ridiculous. That Bane performance is hilarious. And a lot easier to hear at home than it was in the theaters. But yeah, I still think Batman Begins is probably the better of those.
The Robin reveal was when I stopped trusting him.
All right, let's talk about Dunkirk versus Insomnia. Insomnia, the third film that Christopher Nolan made, and Dunkirk, the film he made 3 ago, I guess. I actually just rewatched Insomnia recently, and I found a lot to really enjoy about it that I hadn't picked up on my watch many years ago. I just really enjoy Al Pacino's performance, particularly seeing him sort of unravel as the circumstances on him sort of weigh down on him. The enduring the lack of sleep because of the constant sunshine, and a lot of good performances in that one. It is maybe a little bit of like a stereotypical cop thriller compared to a lot of the stuff Nolan does. Still really enjoyable, still really well done. I'm not going to vote for it over Dunkirk, but want to give it a little bit of shout out. I don't know if anybody else particularly likes Insomnia. Karsten, I feel like I saw that you gave it a positive rating on Letterboxd, at least.
Yeah, I really like Insomnia, and I only watched it because I was trying to complete the Nolan thing for my ranked video, but it's really stuck with me. And when I look at his entire filmography up until Oppenheimer, like, it's one of the few Nolan films that made me feel something very strongly. Like, a lot of it's very, I think I personally just get very unsettled by lack of sleep, and just watching him, like, drift into basically delirium is just so cool and uncomfortable, and I love the ending. So I don't know, I felt more watching Insomnia than I did Dunkirk, but I it's been a while since I've seen Dunkirk, so I can't really speak too much about it. I think it's technically more interesting and well made than Insomnia, but I have a soft spot for that movie.
Did you put Insomnia higher than Dunkirk on your rankings?
I definitely did not, but I might nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, Insomnia,
I don't know. I will not die for.
Yeah, go
Insomnia.
ahead. Yeah.
I would still vote Dunkirk for the record, but yeah.
Yeah. I feel like Insomnia tends to show up either at the bottom or close to the bottom of most people's Nolan rankings, which is a bit of a shame because it is pretty solid. Taylor, I don't know if that's the case for you as well.
Yeah, so I only just watched it for the first time a couple days ago.
Oh,
that was my one blind spot before this. And, like, yeah, it's a solid movie, kind of riffing on Seven a little bit. But I think the reason it, like, ranks so low on so many people's lists, including my own, is that it just has so little like Christopher Nolan DNA. I think it's his one like venture into being just like a Hollywood journeyman. You know, he had no
director for hire
involvement in the story. It was a remake, and I think, you know, it sort of enabled him to make Batman Begins, and like that allowed studios to trust him with that kind of budget and capacity. But I do think it's very much a stepping stone to get to the other spots in his career. And I think I've seen people call his first three films a noir trilogy. I think that's almost happenstantial more than anything. I don't know if like he was just really into noir at the time, but I think even Following, which is also pretty low on my list, but especially Memento, just have so much more like, I don't know, you can see his interests so like radically shaping the narrative.
A little more of his personality inflects the films.
Yeah, I think Insomnia, he's just doing a job. And again, he's such a skilled craftsman that it is still a solid pulpy flick. And yeah, Al Pacino gives one of the great tired performances. And even Robin Williams, I thought, was really unsettling in the movie. But definitely picking Dunkirk over Insomnia.
Yeah, I loved whenever we would get Robin Williams in that more dramatic mode. But I think Dunkirk is the choice
for sure.
here.
There's one line in Insomnia for the behind the scenes. I don't know if you've heard it, where he asks Al Pacino to do something, and Al Pacino's like, I already did that. He goes, no, it's like, look this way, and like look down. He goes, check the dailies. I've already done them. And then Christopher Nolan goes, I checked the dailies. It was already in there. And just like the imagine of a director going, oh my gosh, I never saw he did the move.
Yeah.
So yeah, very young. But like, imagine getting those two that early in your career.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Got good performances out of them both. Also, Hilary Swank and what was Maura Tierney. A lot of people in that movie. Anyway, Oppenheimer versus Following. Arturo, you ever follow somebody just for the thrill?
Into Oppenheimer, I did. I just wanted to see what the reactions to the movie was going to be.
Taylor, I feel like you're the lowest on Oppenheimer out of all of us. Would you go Following above it?
I wouldn't. As lukewarm as I am on Oppenheimer, which I don't dislike Oppenheimer by any means, but I just didn't feel that much after it for reasons we can probably discuss more as we go along the bracket. Following, I respect a lot, and you can see, again, not so much like the time stuff for Nolan, maybe a little bit, but more so his knack for I don't know, tangibility and yeah, I've heard him talk about how he wanted no guns in the film because guns always look phony in independent films, and I think that sort of speaks to his recent reliance on practical effects, especially in Oppenheimer. So I think that's the main thing that stands out for me in Following, but I don't think it's an amazing movie on its own. Again, I think it's more just him cultivating his arsenal. Yeah. So I still go Oppenheimer over.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we were talking about how there's certain things that run through a lot of his films, and you do get a little bit of that like time manipulation stuff that he likes to do in the differing timelines, sort of going back and forth. An early bit of that here, but it's something that was clearly like much more refined and motivated by the time we got to Memento. It's fascinating to visit Following after sort of looking at the ways that Nolan would develop that instinct. But yeah, I don't know if it holds up necessarily that well on its own. It's pretty good, and the ending I think still hits, but yeah, Oppenheimer is for me the pretty clear choice here. I don't know if Karsten, you have much to say about Following either.
Not much to say, no.
Yeah. All right, cool. So why don't we go into our next matchup, which is The Dark Knight versus Doodlebug. Karsten, I know you have a lot to say about Doodlebug.
It's Batman's greatest enemy yet. I have nothing to say about Dude. I thought it was fun. I love shit like that. It's like I keep referencing the ending of Men, not to like bring that movie up, but I just love bits where it like keeps going, and Doodlebug is able to do that in just like 2 minutes, and I think it's a lot of fun. It gets I went on Letterboxd and people like shit on this movie, and it's not bad. It's like a good time. That's all I have to say about Doodlebug.
The biggest thing is it's probably just a victim of where amateur special effects were in that day and age, right? Like it's made in 1996, 7, I think it was, when he was still in film school, and it's like very, very amateurly green screened or something. So it looks a little bit bizarre, but the idea is solid.
I like that look, honestly. I think it looks better than if it was trying to be
cleaner,
that believable. Yeah, I think it's fun.
Definitely funnier.
Yeah.
Arturo, have you ever had a Doodlebug situation at home?
This is the one where it's like he's trying to kill the bug, and then maybe without spoiling Doodlebug for people. No. It's never happened to me personally.
Yeah, don't
Or
you
a
hate
buddy.
it?
Many times.
Yeah. But Taylor, I liked what you were saying about this before we started, that you see the influence that this eventually has on his the way he's thinking about movies.
Yeah, I feel like he's the only person who can really get away with this sort of thing, because like every, I don't know, amateur YouTube short film is some sort of like closed loop thing, and it feels like, I don't know, almost self-parody for him to
Kind of
to do something like that. But it's just such a goofy movie. I feel like he's aware of how, like, I don't know, silly the concept is, while still kind of, I don't know, I think of all these shorts as like sketches for what's to come, not really functioning in their own right, but like
Testing out ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the I don't know, I just have this image of Christopher Nolan in a little workshop, sort of like we'll see in Quay. But these are the kinds of sketches I imagine he's like, you know, figuring all this stuff out for. I'm sure there are like 50 Doodlebugs that no one will ever see that he made in preparation for Tenet.
Exactly.
In preparation for Doodlebug.
Doodlebug is the product of much testing and experimentation.
And all the best around the world.
Yeah.
Is this the one that also's got like the ticking clock, or is that one of the other shorts? Because
I think that was.
It's got some clocks, I think.
That's all of the stuff, right? I think Tarantella had the more prominent clock stuff.
Yeah, because it's like also almost like the score is like a. I was like, oh, you've had this for Dunkirk for a while already. So.
Yeah, he knows what he likes. Speaking of the ticking clock, Man of Steel versus Tenet. Arturo, I think you are the biggest Zack Snyder defender amongst us, and that was Nolan's handpicked man to take over the Superman franchise. He got a story by credit on this film, aside from producing it as well. But do you think it's better than Tenet?
No. It is interesting though that he ended up being a producer, him and his wife, for all like the Snyder stuff all the way to the end for the cut. But I mean, it's still not him fully in there, and I think Tenet is him being as wacky as possible. We were having an argument when we did the bracket with the patrons about this being his 007 movie, which I still stand by because that's what he said he wanted to do. But obviously he gets all of his like sci-fi with it, and to this day, I don't think anyone on this bracket can explain what the hell he was doing in Tenet, other than, you know what, don't think about it, just vibe. And I think that's the best thing that happened with Tenet, because I think even with Interstellar, you know, people were saying, oh, you're too hokey, and then with Dunkirk, they were like, oh, okay, he's a very serious filmmaker. Tenet came in, and he fought for it so hard that by the time people saw it, they felt like it was like a duty to see it. I think it almost like prepped them for this duty that was to go see Oppenheimer and Barbie together. But for Tenet, that idea of just vibing with the movie was something that people didn't really associate with Nolan, and he's been using that phrase a lot for Oppenheimer as well. And I can't. One of these two had said like he's just shifted gears into being in like this third wave of his career, where he's kind of becoming the cooler director and not the like I am the director and I am maniacal on set. I think a lot of the stories from his actors and everybody has been like he's actually really chill for someone who makes movies as meticulous as Tenet, where the score is forwards and backwards and he's putting a plane into a building. So no, I can see Tenet just growing the farther away we are from it. That is that one that like 10 years down the line we're gonna rewatch. We're gonna be like, oh yeah, he was future proofing this movie. So
definitely.
For sure.
Karsten, do you see Christopher Nolan's influence in Man of Steel?
I'll come clean. I haven't seen Man of Steel.
Oh, okay, that's
Didn't have time to watch it for this. Did not.
Only adjacently Nolan related, so that's what makes sense.
Right. I didn't think it had a chance.
How'd you get to watch Black Adam? How'd you understand it?
I know. Hey, I was lost in that. No, but I do really like Tenet. I kind of want to toss it over to Taylor because you did this video like comparing it to Wes Anderson's career and like The French Dispatch, which I thought was like really brilliant, and I'm not gonna ask you to like repeat it, but I think it like made me appreciate Tenet a lot more, even though I already did. I was like, I think because I went into it expecting to be confused and to just kind of enjoy the spectacle of it and just like step inside Christopher Nolan's mind for a bit. And it was I thought like technically incredible. I mean, people will say what they have to say about the sound mix, but I think it's I kind of like it. I like just how soaked in itself it is. Like, I don't know. I really I can vibe with Tenet on the right day. But
did anyone get to see it in theaters?
I saw it at Museum of the Moving Image. They played it 2 years ago on 70. It's pretty nice.
Oh, wow.
I'm so jealous.
Speak on it, bro. That's crazy.
It was great. I mean, prior to that, I just watched the cam rip everyone else watched, or I guess web rip. So it was, I don't know. It was very immersive. Honestly, watching it at home, I was like, what are people talking about? I can hear everything fine.
Right.
I'm sure that was just how my speakers were calibrated, because watching it at Museum of the Moving Image, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's all just a soup right now. I can't make out anything. But I think Tenet is like, we were talking about all these concepts he gestures to in his films that sort of seem deeper than they are, and for a long time the sort of Nolan arc was like people were frustrated about that, and people were sort of, I don't know, angry that people found his film so deep when it's like very surface level. But I think Tenet is pointing to like, it's not that it's surface level, it's that he's not asking us to look any deeper into them, and it's a purely aesthetic experience. And I think Tenet is kind of a self-justification, but usually that term kind of lends itself to insecurity, but I think in Tenet's case, like, the movie is kind of like the proof is in the pudding. It makes a strong enough case for itself while sort of explicitly justifying his other films retroactively. I don't know. I love Tenet. It's shot up my Nolan rankings quite a bit.
Ooh. Absolutely. I'm completely Tenet pilled. And just to continue on this train of thought, we're talking about how it's a vibes movie and it can be confusing, and like that's sort of the reputation that it's developed. But I think that, like, speaking to what Taylor is talking about, it's not particularly confusing until you really try to piece it apart. And if you just sort of let it wash over you, if you sort of let the urgency of the dialogue rather than the specific words that they're saying inform how you're feeling, it does sort of make a kind of sense, right? Like, it's really simple. It's forward and then it's backward. And if you want to get more into the details, that's when you might have a worse time with that movie. But if you're just kind of appreciating it for like the sequences that are being put together, it's so much fun. And to me, it's become one of my favorite Nolan movies.
You need a better lead. I'm sorry. John David Washington, he's got the looks, but he ain't got the swag of his daddy, dude.
He ordered his hot sauce an hour
ago. Yes, thank you, Taylor.
Oh, my God.
All right, so Tenet will beat Man of Steel there. Let's go to a matchup between a couple early Nolan selections. Memento versus The Prestige. I was pretty surprised to see that, at least according to Letterboxd popularity,
Liars.
that The Prestige is his least popular feature film outside of Following. I thought it had a bigger reputation than that. To me, it's probably like the hipster choice for Nolan's best movie. You know, you don't often hear people say that it is, but there are people who will defend very strongly The Prestige against everything else he's done. Arturo, you were saying that these are a couple of your favorites from Chris Nolan. So are you going to go with Memento? Or are you going to go with Prestige?
I'd end the bracket right here. Memento, Prestige are his best movies. I don't know why they're going up against each other. Or how it's the least one when Prestige has Wolverine and a Batman in it.
It makes no sense.
It makes absolutely no sense. I'm going to blame you for it. But between Memento and The Prestige, I think I'm going to go Memento today because, I think it's his best movie.
Well, enough said.
Anybody going to defend The Prestige in this matchup, or are we all going with Memento?
I like The Prestige a bit more, to be honest.
Ooh,
And
talk
look,
about it.
I can't even argue with that. David Bowie?
I just, it's been a while since I've seen Memento. I really liked it when I saw it, but and this might sound terrible, but like, it's kind of like a toy that I played with and had fun figuring out and thinking about a little, but I don't see it as that interesting next to the rest of his work. It's like the way we were talking about Following, or like some of the shorts, where it's like, it just seems like the first film where he really figured out what he was doing and pulled it off, but like he's made that work so much better in other movies. Whereas The Prestige, I'm like, it's just fun. It's like really compelling performances. I don't know. I can't really, I mean, I'm going to pass it on to Taylor here, but I just enjoy watching that movie more than Memento, I guess.
Fair. Taylor, you agree?
No, I'm putting Memento over The Prestige. I do like The Prestige, though. Sorry. I think Memento is like a milestone for him in that he finally sort of cracked the time stuff, and it's such a simple film, but it's like, I don't know, he's taken that framework and extrapolated it into all his other films, and I think Memento is kind of the real genesis for Nolan. I think The Prestige, I think as the Batman trilogy was going along, he also had this staggered other trilogy that's kind of all about making movies. The Prestige, Inception, and Interstellar. Maybe Interstellar a little less so, but I think those three movies are all very like self-reflexive and about the process itself, whereas, you know, Batman or the Dark Knight trilogy were all just sort of standalone products of that mindset and that process. And I think The Prestige also has this sort of underlying Cold War subtext that I don't even think Nolan was aware of how fixated on those tensions he would become in the future. And so I think that's one of the most interesting aspects about it looking back. But I don't know, Memento is just such a tight, clean film. I gotta pick it over The Prestige.
Yeah. I'm also going with Memento, but I do really love The
That's
Prestige.
right.
I think it's just such a fascinating and unique feeling film too. You know, the way he's able to, I mean, he is obsessed with this idea of the subject of the movie informing the form of the movie, right? And like the way Memento is sort of shaped around the short-term memory loss of its central character, this film being shaped around the idea of a magic trick with its different twists and turns, and it just ends up really working, I think, well here. There's always like, it's just it has a really innate ability to catch you off guard, and I think his writing is just very like precise and fun here. The performances are all great. It's a nice marrying of his ability to like expand his scope in terms of his production design and give you these really like fully realized worlds, but still kind of give you characters that feel beyond just their surface, that feel like they're informed by a lot of backstory. And I don't know, I like The Prestige. I need to rewatch it again.
Fantastic.
Memento, that's a classic right there. All right, so our last
what Taylor was saying about his like trilogy of movies. You had mentioned Prestige, right? Because this whole idea of like how you do the magic trick, and I think to this day he quotes it, like that Prestige aspect of it. People want to sit down, but they don't want to know the trick. They just want to go with it. I think that's something he's used for the rest of his career. You then mentioned Inception, that idea of like he is a director, everybody around him is helping him set the sign, yada yada yada. You don't know how you get into a dream the same way you don't know how in a movie you end up in a scene. Instead of Interstellar, Zach and I would put Oppenheimer on that bit. Because we have this whole approach to the idea of the director of Los Alamos hiring everybody around him to be on the set to create something. So that's just what I wanted to toss in there. I do agree with you. I think he's had that through line. And then when we get back to the second round, you had mentioned something about like it's always been about his family. I 100% agree with that as well. But I just want to add the Oppenheimer one in there.
Yeah, definitely still a lot more to get into with Christopher Nolan. But our last first round matchup is between Inception and Quay, the only documentary short that he is attached to. An interesting profile of the Quay brothers, who I didn't know about prior to watching this documentary. They make these very unsettling, creepy stop motion animated films. Interesting to see him kind of lend his talents to a different form, and there's certainly elements, particularly in like the pacing and score, where you kind of feel maybe Christopher Nolan's touch on it, but beyond that, it's not really something that it feels particularly Nolan-esque. I don't know if you had any other reactions to the documentary short, Arturo.
No, I wish it was shot a little bit better, because that man was walking around like like he had just bought tickets to the tour, and he was just like filming things to show people at home.
Yeah, I don't know if Karsten or Taylor, you have anything to say about the short, but I think we can let Inception win this matchup here.
Yeah, I think watching Quay, I wasn't really sure what about it attracted Nolan. I mean, they're interesting artists, and their process is very interesting, but watching it was a little hard to see what, like, I don't know, called to Nolan. But I think it reminded me a little bit of the documentary Paul Thomas Anderson did about Johnny Greenwood and him making this album. I forget the title.
Junoon.
Junoon. And so in Junoon, there's this sort of through line of like all the birds flying around, and it's almost like you know I think it's one of the first Family Guy episodes, and there's this cutaway where like Peter's filming Stewie riding his tricycle for the first time, and then he gets sidetracked and it turns into the American Beauty plastic bag shot. I feel like that's what was going on with PTA and the birds in Junoon, and I think you kind of see Christopher Nolan doing that with the clocks in the studio in Quay. Like, he just can't help himself. He sees a clock and he's got to throw it in.
Man loves his timepieces for sure. All right, so Inception will win that matchup, and we'll get into the next round of our Nolan bracket with Interstellar versus Batman Begins. Arturo, are you going to go with Batman Begins over the most popular Christopher Nolan movie?
Nah, it's got to be Interstellar. For the love, baby.
It's the more powerful than time or any other force in the universe. I have a feeling none of us are going to go with Batman Begins over Interstellar, unless I'm wrong. Yeah. All right, so Interstellar will take... Oh, the bracket went weird. Interstellar takes that matchup. Yeah. And we'll move on to Dunkirk versus Oppenheimer.
Wow.
All right, Taylor, now's your chance to
Yeah, I know I'm
slander
gonna
the
get-
name of J. Robert Oppenheimer.
I know I'm gonna get pummeled in this round, so I'll say my piece on Dunkirk, which I would put over Oppenheimer. I think in the same way Memento like set such a like simple foundation for his formal approach going forward. Dunkirk is like this breath of fresh air. You know, for a while there he was on this streak of like each movie outdoing the last in terms of scope and spectacle, and you know, Dunkirk's definitely a big abrasive movie, but it's so minimalistic and stripped down compared to everything else. And like the formal approach of it, just the three intersecting timelines of different lengths, is just like, I feel like that's the cleanest demonstration of his approach with time dilation and stuff, and sort of what I was talking about earlier, where he's basically doing with time what the cubists were doing with, you know, space and two-dimensional lines. And so that's why I value Dunkirk. I remember when it came out, I was like, man, do we really need another World War II movie? Because I thought we were kind of done with World War II movies in general, and the genre was just gonna be put to bed, which of course it never will. But it also, like, the gimmick of Dunkirk wasn't really advertised. So as soon as, you know, I sat down and it's just like 3 simple title cards that explain the whole time process or whatever, that's when it all, like, it clicked. I got what about this subject Christopher Nolan was drawn to, and I also think it ushered in this period of I mean, I call it a period. It's mostly just Dunkirk and Tenet, but I think he's much stronger as like a formalist rather than like a character writer, and I think a lot of the more pathos heavy films of his kind of fall flat a little bit for me. I mean, I like all his movies, but I think Dunkirk and Tenet were him sort of accepting, like, you know, characters are just holding me back, just pure technique.
Yeah.
And they've both shot up my ranking quite a bit. Tenet a little more so than Dunkirk, but I just admire the minimalism of Dunkirk compared to everything else in his filmography.
I agree with Taylor about it until Oppenheimer came in, and he just surprised me with being able to write a character. I think it's the best performance he's gotten out of an individual in all of the movies in this bracket. So I'm going Oppenheimer.
I agree with Taylor as well. And I think I'm going to go Dunkirk. I love Oppenheimer, but there is something about the way that Dunkirk feels like it's refined the strengths of Nolan as a filmmaker and just streamlined them in a way that best suits his talents. The whole construction of it, which to me is almost like a response to the conveniences that other action films have, where the right heroes show up at exactly the right time, and it all feels a little bit like preordained in a way that makes it fictional. He's sort of trying to solve that problem through that structure and give each bit of it its due in this thing that becomes this kind of sweeping cacophony of war. I just love the presentation of it. I also really love that Dunkirk specifically is not really a film about being on the aggressive. It's a film about retreating, and it's a film about saving people, right? It's a film about bringing soldiers home, and in doing that, it's one of the rare war films where the enemy is almost entirely unseen. There's a couple of like shots of soldiers from the back, and they're obscured, but you don't see like really any enemy combatant faces and whatever. It's sort of like it's not focused in that same way that a lot of other war films are. And I just think it's such a cleverly designed thing and such a beautifully executed package. I don't know. Dunkirk's one of my favorite Nolan movies. It's certainly top 3 for me, which might leave us in a tough spot because I feel like Karsten is going to go with Oppenheimer here.
I am going to go Oppenheimer. And weirdly enough, like, Taylor's argument for Dunkirk like made me realize how much I like Oppenheimer, because it's like, because you were like if blah. The thing is, I feel like because he's working with like a nonfiction character and already kind of has the character there for him, he's able to, I feel like, go deeper into the form and with like an already established guy and just kind of, you know, do everything he's wanted to do in one movie. Like, it's already a very, I don't know, fleshed out story. I would say it's not a perfect movie. There's like too much going on, I would argue, but I think like it's definitely him in his most like I don't want to say extreme, but I don't know. His form was just really working on me, that movie. Especially in like this new era of his films. I feel like it's the perfect blend of, you know, the substance and the style that I don't know. It just really clicked with me. But I don't know. I feel like if I were to rewatch Dunkirk, I might really love it. But at the moment, I'm Oppenheimer pilled.
Oppenpilled?
Yeah, I do figure that one out.
I do still want to rewatch Oppenheimer. I couldn't get tickets for like I think 2 more weeks until my first rewatch. Just because I wanted to go back to Lincoln Square. And I'll say the first time I watched it, I was operating on like 4 hours of sleep, and I'd been traveling. And I know it's not like optimal viewing conditions, but I don't know. I admire Oppenheimer as such a like comprehensive vessel for, like Karsten was saying, all of Nolan's interests. He's sort of able to, I don't know, have his cake and eat it in Oppenheimer. And it is very much an outlier compared to everything else he's done. That, like Zach was saying earlier, that him actually sort of making a stance on these political themes and not just, I don't know, using them in the same sort of empty gesturing he does in the Dark Knight trilogy. But I think he's still got a lot of room to grow in writing these, like, I don't know, ensemble courtroom dramas. I hate to just like compare him to other filmmakers, and you know, I've got some problems with Aaron Sorkin, but I do think this movie is riffing heavily on The Social Network in a way that just like, I don't know, rhythmically, energetically, it doesn't have the same punch. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel that Social Network comparison, but I feel like Oppenheimer is right there for me. I kind of love the way he writes some of those scenes, but I don't know. I'm close to the fence. I still probably am Team Dunkirk. Art, we can't persuade you over to the Dunkirk side of things.
The man, he's crazy. He did IMAX for Dunkirk to capture everything, and he's like, but what if I IMAXed a face? That's great.
I do respect that.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
All right, I can change my vote to Oppenheimer to get us through this.
I understand.
But we fought the good battle for Dunkirk.
As Team Dunkirk as I am, it would have felt wrong to leave it on the wayside here.
Yeah,
exactly.
But y'all make a point though. It is what's his name's favorite movie, so like
Quentin Tarantino.
It's got a lot of love.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the matchup between The Dark Knight and Tenet. Arturo, are you going with
y'all need to be for real
Batman
right now.
Film or the vibes?
Y'all need to be serious, people.
Oh, I'm gonna be serious.
How far do we take the bit?
Look, The Dark Knight changed the game. I know it's cliche. Y'all want to go back. Y'all want to make fun of it. It's the original Barbie. It is a man coming in to take IP and take it to the next level. But instead of getting things all bright and colorful, this man made things dark and gritty and just changed all of Hollywood. He had to make Oppenheimer to apologize to the changes that he did, the ripple effects. And since then, I don't think you've had a comic book movie, I would even say a piece of IP that has been as influential and as impacting as this thing has been. Just the idea of even just the titling to go from Batman Begins to The Dark Knight, how are you supposed to know it's a sequel? You're not. It's a standalone movie that will be here for generations to come. One of the best supporting performances, some of the best cinematography, one of the best scores that I think he's built upon to this day with that like kind of building crescendo of time. Penny agrees. The Dark Knight all the way.
That was Caitlin sneezing. Anyway,
so Tenet.
Yes, please.
I can't disagree with the points you're making, but for me personally, I have Tenet above The Dark Knight. I honestly think Tenet is my personal favorite Nolan score. I think.
Yes, talk about that.
It's
over
both,
Oppi's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yo, my man killed it in Oppenheimer though.
Oppie, I don't think is top 3 for me.
That's
but
crazy.
I don't know. Tenet is just this formal, extreme. Because the sort of two worlds I was talking about earlier is, the populist entertainment and sort of esoteric abstraction. I think he's pushing that abstract quality to its furthest extreme in Tenet, while still ultimately being, I hate to say it, but a vibes movie. It's still ultimately a piece of populist entertainment that you can just watch and have a good time. But it is so like, I don't know, just the way it functions should not make sense. It shouldn't work, but it does. And I also think the sense of like moving backwards as this like uncanny bodily process in an otherwise like forward moving environment is such an unsettling way to communicate, like, I guess, radioactivity, which is basically what it is, and basically setting the stage for Oppenheimer. Basically two ends of his nuclear anxieties. I think, I don't know, Tenet is probably number 2 for me, number 2 Nolan film.
Damn.
So I'm ride or die Tenet, but I'll cede the floor.
Totally. All right, look, Arturo's right that The Dark Knight is this like highly influential masterpiece of superhero filmmaking that's both able to like ground the idea of something like Batman in like a modern reality and it play on these like things that scare us, like domestic terrorism and chaos and whatever, and it ended up being the film that sort of defined the tone of the most dominant genre of filmmaking for the next decade or so, maybe still.
America.
I'm going with Tenet. Tenet is awesome.
Hell yeah.
Tenet is unemulatable. There's only one guy who can make things go forward and backward and look awesome like that. It's Christopher Nolan. He crashed the 747 into the Freeport in Tallinn. It is awesome stuff. And yeah, man, that score is unmatchable. That's Ludwig Göransson going crazy. I really, really love Tenet, which leaves the tough choice to Karsten.
Karsten, you look a little...
I might be Tenet pilled. I don't know. I might... Let's go! For the bit, I might have to go Tenet, but I don't know, man. I do like... I enjoy Tenet as a concept and like talking about it. But like when I like think about the actual movies themselves, I do think The Dark Knight is like incredible and pretty much flawless to me. Just stepping back for a second.
Forwards and backwards, baby.
Yeah, and as well as forward. I don't know. You know what? Just because it's today, I'm gonna say Tenet. Because if we're speaking like Christopher Nolan,
What's today?
I feel like causing some chaos. I think I like what you guys had to say about it, and I do feel like it's it's the one that like got me to, I don't know. You know, when I watch The Dark Knight, it's like I really like it. And when I think about Christopher Nolan, I kind of like, I roll my eyes a bit watching The Dark Knight. But the Tenet like kind of won me over on him as a filmmaker. And I was like, all right, he's, I don't know. I might have to go The Dark Knight. I'm sorry. I'm trying really hard to defend
Think about
Tenet,
it.
but
When the plane goes into the building, that's cool. But then it's like it's in the building,
Yeah.
you can't really see it. But the semi, 360 view, like
for
to this day-
Chicago, I have to go
you know what?
Dark
Thank
Knight.
you.
You know,
what I'm talking about. You know what's up.
All right. So again, we're stuck 2-2, so we have to go to our time-tested scientific tiebreaker method. Caitlin, what's your favorite?
Dark Knight.
Yes.
There we go.
No.
Hang out with her more, Zach. She knows what she's talking about.
Betrayal. We'll have to talk about this later. Tenet.
Zach starts sneezing.
All right, so Dark Knight sneaks by, but we'll forever have Tenet. What's the line? I should have the line ready. With that Robert Pattinson says to David Washington at the end. Whatever, we'll get it later. We'll fix it in post. So Dark Knight sneaks into the semifinals, and we're at our last quarterfinal matchup: Memento versus Inception. His low-budget indie original idea, or his blockbuster $100 million budgeted original idea. Two very different ends of the Nolan spectrum, even if they definitely feel thematically connected in some ways. Karsten, between Memento and Inception, which one do you prefer?
It's funny because the way I was describing Memento is like a thing I could play with and then put down and never thinking about again. Like that's kind of what Inception is or was like when it came out. I feel like everyone was just like, what does it all mean? But I don't know. I think it's a bigger, more exciting, more compelling version of Memento, personally. I know they're very different, but like,
yeah,
I kind of get the same fix out of the two. I personally think, at least before Oppenheimer came around, that like Inception was like the Christopher Nolan movie. And like it kind of does everything he tries to do in pretty seamlessly, and is just a lot of fun in the process, like super accessible, I would say. But so yeah, I think I'm an Inception guy at the end of the day. Nothing against Memento. I don't dislike Memento, but
this might be an interesting opportunity to ask, what was your like introduction to Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker? Because I feel like between The Dark Knight, Memento, and Inception, that was a lot of people's entry point, at least like considering our general age range here. Like for me, I go back to like being a preteen interested in film and scrolling the IMDb top 250 and seeing Memento. I think it was at number 14 at the time, and catching it and then having my mind blown and forever just kind of charting his path. But was The Dark Knight your first Chris Nolan movie? Was it Inception?
it was Inception for me.
Nice. Do you feel like that has any influence over which movies you think are better?
I think it might. It's like it's a bit of a classic in my mind, or at least in my own film journey. Like it was one of the first movies that I was like pretty affected by. But that said, I also think Memento, while Inception was the first film of his that I had seen, like I saw Memento in film school, and it was also one of the earliest Christopher Nolan movies I had seen, and that was similar, I guess, to Tenet. Was when I started like kind of paying a bit more attention to what he was doing, and I think
Totally
that speaks to what the film pulls off. Like, I don't know, still Inception though. Yeah.
Taylor, do you remember what your first Nolan movie was?
Yeah, technically it was it was Batman Begins, but my first Batman Begins experience was one Thanksgiving. My uncle like pirated it, and we watched the first like 10-15 minutes before, or I don't know how long we got in before there was dialogue, but it was overdubbed in Chinese. And like we tried just going along with it, we tried troubleshooting it, and like yeah, like 10-15 minutes in, we just threw in the towel, and like it was probably another few days before I saw it, but that was technically my first experience, which would foreshadow the Tenet, the infamous Tenet web rip. But yeah, I mean, Christopher Nolan, it's hard to track like when I kind of became aware of him, because I was pretty young when Batman Begins came out. I obviously wasn't like privy to directors at that age, and so I think I had a similar experience once I like got into film and like scrolling the IMDb top 250, and I probably watched Memento for the same reasons. And so I didn't see Inception when it came out, partly because it was just so oversaturated, and also partly because I couldn't drive, and I just didn't ask my parents to take me. So my only Inception experience for years was watching it on my laptop in high school, and so it's been pretty low on my rankings since then. I'm sure part of it was just me being a contrarian back in the day, and but last week I was thinking like, I really ought to give Inception a rewatch. It's a shame it's not like I can't have that theatrical experience. Happenstantially, I scrolled on Museum of the Moving Images website, and it just so happened that the day after I was having this thought, they were playing Inception in 70 millimeter. So I saw it last week, and it's I think it overtakes Memento for me.
Really?
Wow.
I think where like Memento versus The Prestige are like two very different movies, and I love the simplicity of Memento. I think Inception is just taking exactly what he did in Memento and expanding it on such a grander level that's also a lot more in touch with what I was saying about like alienation from the people around him, specifically because of the creative process. I think this time around I was a lot more aware of like the Matrix parallels that Inception has. All this talk about leap of faith and choosing your reality, but it's sort of the inverse Matrix, because they're choosing the fake reality over actual reality. And the real, like, I don't know, decisive moment is like, in order to get out of limbo, you have to permanently accept this idea that your reality is perhaps not real, and living with that uncertainty. And so the whole movie, they're shooting his kids from behind, they're sort of abstracted from him, he's alienated from it. And I think this serves as a very clear allegory for Chris Nolan as this like kind of stickler for filmmaking. His own kids have likened him to Reynolds Woodcock. I think it's sort of similar to James Cameron in Avatar 2, and sort of reckoning with like being a craftsman first and a father second, which I don't want to like read too much into his family relationships. I know the Reynolds Woodcock thing was in jest, but I think he is very much harboring these emotions, and as we'll probably talk about more with Interstellar, like missing out on moments in his kids' childhoods because he's so immersed in this world. But again, he's like the Batman of blockbuster filmmaking. It's a duty he has to abide by. And I think Inception was the first of his like really reckoning with that alienation. And so that's why I put it over Memento.
Awesome. So I think that's 2 votes for Inception. My vote is going to Memento. Art, I think you also said that Memento is your favorite Nolan?
Yeah, I think it would have been what I started with. I was a wee lad in the 90s looking for Tarantella at the library, but then soon after, when I grew up, I went to Blockbuster, gave the dude the 150, 250, whatever the list was. He gave me Memento and Prestige the same day. So that was like my combo for that weekend, and that's where I started with it. I did get to see Batman Begins in drive-in theater. I saw The Dark Knight in Texas right before going to Mexico on an IMAX screen. That's why I'm an IMAX damn near.
You're such a Batman guy. I'm surprised that you caught those other ones before. Batman Begins.
Well, I mean, they were, yeah, I guess. And then towards the end of it, I think from Dark Knight, Inception on, I've seen all of them in theaters. But for here, I do agree with what Taylor's saying. Inception is like the special effects version of Memento, whereas Memento's a little bit more stripped down, but they are technically the same movie, and where it's two guys who are lying to themselves, trying to like change their own narrative of what they want it to be. I'm one who believes like Inception is a double job. It's not just them trying to incept the idea for the boss's kid. I also do think it's a job being done on the main character in order for him to realize, that kind of meta-ness that Nolan's always dealing with, of whether he's going to stay with his family or not. But I just think Memento's so stripped down, that's like one of the first scripts that I studied that I still have to give it to that one. But I think Inception might be the thing that he's recognized with the most, right next to The Dark Knight in terms of imagery.
Yeah, I was almost a little surprised that Inception wasn't number one over Interstellar. That feels like for a lot of people the moment when Christopher Nolan became like Christopher Nolan, not just guy.
He was on his eye game, right? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
Inception.
Letterboxd came out 2013.
Right, so that would make sense too for Interstellar.
Yeah. I think
that's
that actually
popularity.
plays a big part in why The Prestige and Inception aren't higher than you'd probably expect.
For
Although
sure.
The Dark Knight is pretty high. I'm actually surprised Interstellar's number one over The Dark Knight, even with the recency compared to...
It's a lot of people like that one. I didn't realize how many like film students and like people who don't even care about movies, when you like ask them what their favorite sci-fi movie is, they all say Interstellar.
Oh, yeah.
So there's something about this new generation where that movie just hit for them.
Yeah, that's another phenomenon that I found in film school. A lot of people I went to film school with say that it was Nolan films that inspired them to go there, which I don't know if a lot of people who are going through film school are going to find themselves working with Nolan budgets anytime soon. But anyway, we are at a deadlock once again. I don't know if anybody is feeling very Fence City right now. Otherwise, we can return to Caitlin for one more tiebreaker. Maybe? All right, Caitlin, settle in. Memento.
Damn.
All right.
What
Cool.
the hell? Oh, man.
There's a reason that I'm with her, I guess. I don't know.
I keep picturing Karsten with Memento, and it's that Andy meme where he's like, I don't want to play with you no more.
That's how it feels.
All right, so Memento sneaks into the semi-finals of our Chris Nolan bracket. Let's go back to Interstellar versus Oppenheimer. Karsten, which side of the fence do you land on for this matchup?
I've never been a big Interstellar guy. I feel like I need to. Maybe I was like young and in like high school when I first heard about this movie, and I was not into it. So I feel like I'm just not the guy here to ask. I'm not the Chris Nolan expert here, but I do really love Oppenheimer and think a lot of what if I'm not going to bat for Inception, I guess I'll do it for Oppenheimer. I really thought it was going to be Inception. Like, I think that's the closest to Inception as far as like the best Chris Nolan movie for me. Like it like I mentioned earlier. Yeah, I think it's I don't want to say the cleanest, but I love the edit the most. I think it pulls off the edit at least the best of any of his films, given or what it was given at least. I think it blends everything I love about him pretty well. And I do have my flaws with it, but I feel like the more I've sat with the film, the more I've grown to love it and think a lot of the things I didn't like about it actually kind of work in its favor. Like I'm like in the minority in that I was not crazy about the third act when I saw it, and now I'm like, I feel like the third act is what has made it so affecting and like why I keep thinking about it. So I think it's, I don't know, it's the film of his that is left the biggest impression on me, which I know is
absolutely
not what Taylor feels, but I'm like, personally, I think it's one of his most emotional to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I want to return to what you were saying about the editing, because I also was really, really struck by it. And it's something that I think you see glimpses of in Tenet when his collaborations with Jennifer Lame started. But I think you really, really feel it in Oppenheimer, where he has this ability to just blend several scenes together, where scenes start and new scenes, some scenes stop and new scenes start. And it kind of just flows in a way where it's like unbroken 10 to 15 minute sequences that just sort of propel you through history, and it's really, really remarkable stuff just to have that kind of edge of your seat urgency in a biopic about events that happened nearly 100 years ago. So there's a lot I really, really love about Oppenheimer. But Interstellar I also revisited. That was one of the movies I made sure to revisit before doing this bracket, and like Art was talking about, it grew so much in my estimation. I think I approached it less cynically, for sure, but
you had Penny.
Yeah, exactly. I had a dog in my life who I love very much, and I now know about the power of love. So I'm I'm weak. No, I mean, it is a really remarkable film too, and just the ability he has to stage certain sequences, particularly like the docking sequence, in so many ways is like a precursor to that whole atomic bomb sequence, particularly how he loves to crescendo the sound and then bring it back down to nothing, and really is able to make the most of silences in his films. So a lot to really love about both these films. I'm not sure I'm ready to make my decision. Art, which one are you going to go with?
I think they're both fantastic movies. I really love Oppenheimer. It could be the bias that I have for it right now, which makes me almost want to put it over Interstellar. But Interstellar's been out for a decade. I got to see that. That was one of my first 70mm IMAX movies. I damn near had a heart attack. And I think it stood the test of time. I'm going to go Interstellar today.
All right, so that's one for Interstellar, one for Oppenheimer. Taylor, I think that's going to be another one for Interstellar.
Yeah, definitely for Interstellar. I saw it when it was in theaters, and it blew my mind. And then I, probably haven't seen it in like 8 or 9 years at this point. So I didn't sour on it or anything. It kind of just like drifted from my consciousness. But in thinking about Oppenheimer, that was what got me to realize. And I'm due a rewatch, but I think I have Interstellar at number 1 personally. I think. Wow. Those themes of like alienation from his kids we were talking about with Inception are just like cranked up to 10 in Interstellar. Like 100%. Inception ends with kind of a cheeky like, oh, what's reality? But Interstellar is like this cry of anguish that I don't think he's really achieved in any of his other films. And I know, talking about like Tenet and Dunkirk, I've been in the camp of like his more personal pathos-driven movies are kind of holding him back, but I think Interstellar is the exception to that, where it really is that transcendent. I never got the hate for the love transcends time quote. I was always pro. Yeah, I don't know. I got to rewatch it to get more into specifics, but for me, Interstellar's number 1, and also. Wow. I'm on the fence between Tenet and Interstellar for best score.
Tenet or Interstellar? Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's Zimmer, right? That Interstellar score is really Zimmer, remarkable as well.
The organs.
Yeah. All right, so that is another Interstellar vote, and I don't know. I guess I'm enough on the fence that I'm comfortable giving my vote to Interstellar here, even if maybe Oppie has my heart.
What would Caitlin said?
Caitlin, what would you have said? Interstellar or Oppenheimer? Ooh, so
you said Interstellar. That's crazy, though. That's
yeah.
All right, so we'll go ahead and put Interstellar into our Chris Nolan finals, where it will go up against either The Dark Knight or Memento. Arturo, you're the biggest Batman fan I know, but are you going to go against The Dark Knight here?
Yeah, Memento. Dark Knight sucks.
It's your favorite Batman movie, or am I misremembering that?
Dark Knight, and the Batman that got really close. I know every year there's like a new Batman movie, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's the best one." The Batman got really close to the Dark Knight for sure. But Memento, I still think is his best written movie. I think it's his best directed thing. And outside of these movies, I would have, instead of a short, I told Zach, let's put him explaining Memento on that whiteboard. I think that should go up here as one of his videos. So I'm going Memento for this one.
Yeah. A truly iconic piece of Christopher Nolan material. But all right, Memento, 1 vote for that. Karsten, I think you were our biggest anti-Memento guy, so I assume you're going with the Dark Knight here.
Guy fucking hates Memento.
Words in my mouth.
He doesn't even use sticky notes. It's crazy.
I love the Dark Knight. It's a lot of my favorites have gotten kicked off the bracket already, so I'm really I'm not super passionate about the Dark Knight, but I do like it a lot more than Memento. I mean, like I mean, it is actually, no, I was gonna say it's like one of his least personal, but I know there's like a lot of arguments to be made why it is very personal. But I think like all that aside, I think it's just a really entertaining and probably, I don't know, my favorite superhero movie, which is not a hot take, but it's like what I would want out of something like that. It's either that or like the 60s Batman's, like either side of the spectrum. Yeah, I don't know. I like it a lot, so I think I'm gonna say The Dark Knight.
Dark Knight does have the family thing too. Like he's like, can I be with Rachel, or is my duty going to be like? It's a through line, really heavy in his movies.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It really bridges the gap between, like, you wouldn't really think to put the Batman movies in conversation with the more like
that too, yeah,
self-reflexive movies about filmmaking, but I do think it is an omnipresent through line.
He's a video vigilante. That's who Nolan is for us.
Yes.
Taylor, are you gonna also vote with The Dark Knight?
No, I'm voting Memento. I like The Dark Knight a lot.
Let's
but
go.
I don't, for whatever reason, I've never responded to it the same way most people
I disagree
seem
there.
to. I mean, it's definitely the best Dark Knight trilogy movie. It very well could be the best superhero movie, but for whatever reason, I think the first act just like I've always struggled to buy into it, and like once I get they're like setting the stage or whatever, and like once it hits the ground running, it's kind of nonstop. But I don't know, for whatever reason, I've just always been kind of lukewarm on The Dark Knight. That's harsh. I like it a lot, but Memento is top 3.
Dark Knight is this movie that had so much effusive love thrown its way, particularly because it was this like early apex for the superhero genre, and this piece of evidence that superhero films could be like treated more substantively, and that they could reach the heights of this type of filmmaking. I think a lot of people were surprised by what The Dark Knight was able to do, given its confinements or its constraints, if that's what you want to call it, the boxes that it has to check. There's a lot to really, really love and appreciate about The Dark Knight. I think like the first 2/3 of it for me are about as close as we'll get to a perfect superhero film. But I will always sort of like have a ceiling with stuff like that, and Memento is a film that exceeds that ceiling. I just really respond to what he's doing in that film. So we'll put Memento into our finals for the best Chris Nolan movie bracket, where it faces off against Interstellar. Taylor, you just said that Interstellar is your number 1 Chris Nolan movie. So why do you think it deserves to win this bracket?
Again, just that anguish. I think as much as I respect the Oppenheimer aside, the direction his career's gone and embracing technique and form, I think Interstellar was this very like therapeutic film for him, and sort of getting all this off his chest and sort of enabling him to enter this newer phase. Maybe Oppenheimer kind of negates that point because he's tapping into a lot of the same things there, but it has always landed better for me with Interstellar. I say always, Oppenheimer just came out. But yeah, I don't know. Same like same bag of Nolan tricks, time dilation. I don't know. Just the image of him screaming through the bookshelf is so like that's the Nolan through line. That's like what I think all his other work is sort of emotionally built around, and I think Interstellar does the best job expressing that.
Definitely. All right, so that's a vote for Interstellar. Art, why do you think Memento should win this bracket?
I think it has been one of the most cohesive scripts that he's written. I think it's his tightest script. I think, as we mentioned, it's almost like the blueprint for what he was able to use for a lot of his other stories. And even in Interstellar, Taylor had mentioned the scene with the bookshelf. I think that scene that everyone memes and uses as a gif where he's crying after the video message, I think I don't know, this last decade or so, we're so, y'all may know the word for it, we do react to his emotions, but we'd rather laugh at it and use it as a reaction gif than to like really
detachment.
Yeah, we're all this irony that we have instead of like, no, that I think is his most profound, the most emotional he's been in all of his movies. Because as we've been saying, if a lot of these films where he's working on this art, this duty that he feels, if they're almost still love letters to his kids, that's him crying on screen. But Memento's the best thing that he's done. I think it's one of the I know it's not his debut, but one of the strongest early films to have. I think it's one of the best performances from Guy Pearce that he's ever had in a movie. I think the use of black and white, something that we end up seeing in Oppenheimer later, is excelled here. The timing, just the way that you can read the script forwards and backwards, it's better than Tenet. Like, it's got everything going for it for a Christopher Nolan movie, for a movie in general, and I'm picking Memento.
All right, one for Memento, one for Interstellar. Karsten, you've talked about your great indifference to both these films.
Love both these movies quite a bit. Yeah.
But now you got to pick one for the best Chris Nolan film.
I am gonna go. I am gonna go with Memento.
Okay.
For hey. Just it's the it's the closest to Inception I have here. Again, I was like a high school boy when I saw Interstellar and was like just not there in my life for that movie.
Totally.
I think I would like it a lot more here, but just speaking for myself today, Memento is like very up my alley as far as like what I want out of a Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah.
And
it does feel like a film that is very much tied into like who he is and what he's great at and what we think of when we think of Christopher Nolan. So maybe it is an apt winner for the Chris Nolan movie bracket.
Not what I expected, I'll be honest.
What I expected either.
This is not what I expected.
Even though I love that film. But yeah, I'm glad to have a little bit of support in my appreciation for Memento. But a lot of really great films. Memento, the winner of the bracket, but is it the most Christopher Nolan movie? Karsten, do you think there's another movie that's more Christopher Nolan than this one?
I think Tenet is probably the most Christopher Nolan movie, in my opinion, but maybe I'm wrong there.
Taylor, you agree?
I don't know. I think maybe Inception is the most Christopher Nolan, even though like I've talked about Tenet as like reverse seared Inception. Yes. Which, mathematically should make it more Christopher Nolan, but I don't know.
Gets inverted.
Exactly. I think whatever the most Christopher Nolan means, I'm feeling Inception on this one. Maybe it's recency bias, because my third eye opened last week, but
Taylor's gonna see all the movies at the Museum of the Movie Givers.
I hope so. Except Insomnia.
No, I hope Oppenheimer plays it for you. I would also say Inception with Taylor because it's got the bomb. I think it went beyond the movie. It went into the trailers. I think it's got the dark and grittiness that The Dark Knight had because everybody wanted to have that. The time reversal like Tenet. I keep telling you Tenet's a 007 movie. Inception's a 007 movie. He's admitted that he took sequences from like Russia with Love and everything else in there. And I also think it's one of his strongest ensembles until Oppenheimer. But in Oppenheimer, they're never like all in the same room together like that. So I think Inception is his most Nolan movie that there is.
All right. Well, we've come to some big decisions about Christopher Nolan's filmography, and I'm glad we had y'all on to help us. Thanks again, Taylor and Karsten. Karsten, I know you've got to run. I don't know if you want to leave us with anything you got working on, something you got coming out soon before you go.
For now, honestly, I'll just say check out my YouTube channel, Karsten Runquist. And that's about it. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for hanging with us.
Appreciate it.
Bounce, but thank you. See you guys.
Yeah, no worries. We'll talk on Twitter later.
Yep. Peace. Awesome. Bye-bye.
I did want to get into a little bit the idea of Christopher Nolan and his use of sound, which has been one of the things that people have derided him for or just sort of like made fun of him about as movie after movie has been like for a while harder and harder to hear. Oppenheimer probably being the corrective to that, in that it's very crisp, even though it has like a very overwhelming sound mix. Taylor, have you been frustrated with the way that Nolan implements sound in his movies, or do you actually appreciate it?
I think it's essential to the don't try to understand it, just feel it mentality. And it's so funny that Tenet came out and everyone was like, this movie sounds like shit. And then in just like a random interview, someone asked like, oh, Christopher Nolan, what's your favorite part of the filmmaking process? And he's like, probably sound mixing. I feel
No way.
yeah, just his doubling down on that. I have
troll.
to respect it too much. So I'm pro. Yeah.
Yeah. You have more problems with it, or you have grown to like it as well?
Well, I like watching a lot of things with subtitles once it's at home, so it's like I don't expect it to be an issue eventually. I think it just makes sense. Whether I'm for it or against it is kind of irrelevant. It's like, does it make sense for a filmmaker who wants to do things on film, who wants to capture things at the moment, doesn't want special effects? Doodlebug, I think that was the reason why he was like, you know what, I'm never going to do special effects again. But for a dude who wants everything so old school, so natural, that leads you to a guy who's like, what's the most authentic way, even if it's like difficult to like listen to. It's like a guy who's obsessed with coffee telling a newbie, you gotta drink it black, this Ethiopian beans from over there. They're gonna be like, no, this is too bitter for me. I think he's just so far ahead of it for what he wants it to feel like and sound like, that he's not paying attention to like what it should sound like. They always talk about Foley.
Right.
Foley shouldn't be the sound of the horse. It should be what you think a horse sounds like. It should be what you think a punch sounds like. Nolan's like, nah, I wanna go above and beyond, even if it's not for a mainstream audience. But I think people catch up to it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that often people forget that film is a medium that is sound and video. It's not either isolated, and it's not like you're hearing these sort of garbled voices without seeing what's going on. As you were mentioning, Art, like there are diegetic reasons for the obscured sound, whether it's the masks that Tom Hardy frequently wore in his movies or other sort of just like loud noises reasons. But I often think about like the dialogue in a Chris Nolan movie similar to the way that I feel about speed reading. I was taught that in order to speed read, what you should do is you should take your finger and put it on the page and just sort of like guide it down the page faster than you can read. So you're kind of only grabbing quick glimpses of the words. So you're maybe not like understanding every single word that's on the page, but you get the bigger picture. And that's how I always feel with Chris Nolan movies. I don't know if I could transcribe all the dialogue in his films, but I could tell you what's happening in the stories. And that's ultimately all I really need.
Visually, wouldn't it be like a close-up? Like you're watching something, and if you didn't pick it up with your eyes, the filmmaker will like close up or give you like a flashback or something. Because there are moments like in Oppenheimer where you see a flashback to someone passing, and you quickly see hands. That gives you an entire other thing. I came out of it seeing people claim that they saw it. I'm like, no, that was in the movie. They're like, no, I think I saw something. I have a theory. I'm like, no, that's in the movie. So the same way visually you think you saw something, maybe you think you heard something, or maybe didn't hear something. So it's just another side of that coin of like how you deal with the audio is also how you deal with it visually.
Totally. And now that we have seen Oppenheimer recently, and he's out there working on whatever is going to come next. Taylor, is there anything that you're hoping for from the next Chris Nolan film? Are you hoping for a return to the vibes of Tenet or the scale of something like Interstellar? Or are you happy for him to kind of work into like historical route that something like Oppenheimer was in?
I think I'd probably want him to lean more into the vibes of Tenet.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to like predict where he's going from here, just because I feel like Oppenheimer was him getting so much off his chest, in the same way Interstellar was. Tenet, he's not really saying anything. He's just like curating this experience, and I think that's probably the most longevity he'll have. I don't know. I guess that's all I can really like conceive of him doing down the line. If he wants to lean more into the courtroom drama stuff, more power to him. I'd respect it, but I'm team vibes.
Absolutely.
Do y'all care
do you feel the
about
same?
his 007 movie?
I mean, I'd be here for it. He's a guy who has the ability
It's
to
time.
pull off
Yeah.
like big scale action filmmaking in a way that is actually exciting, that feels practical and on the edge of danger in the way that I appreciate for action films. He already loves the protagonist in a nicely fit suit. All the pieces are there.
But would you rather
That's true.
him do his own stuff instead of being, all the tentacles that come with a franchise?
Yeah, that's fair. Bond
Or is he the guy to
mo-
come fix it?
Well, Taylor, what do you think?
Well, I honestly think Tenet is such a 007 movie. It almost feels
Thank
redundant
you.
for him to actually
I agree, yeah.
make one
Yeah.
within the IP. That said, I am curious to see what he'd do, sort of going back to like, I guess Oppenheimer isn't really like this like Tenet obviously is sci-fi logic. You can't make a James Bond movie unless the villain made this death machine that makes everything go in reverse. But I'm just curious to see how he would like take a lot of those formal approaches and apply them to just like a grounded action movie without the sort of liberty to do these physics bending things.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
See that?
And just going to the Bond element of it, it's such a like malleable franchise that I feel like even though I love Nolan's ability to play in an original world, I don't think it would be too restricted by the Bond elements of it. Like we've both been saying, like Tenet is close enough to a Bond film that he clearly can kind of do something in that mode. So I'd be happy to see it. I'm just generally happy to see anything from Christopher Nolan. He's a filmmaker who, even when I don't particularly love his work, I really do find things to enjoy about it. It's become one of the more consistently rewarding filmmakers to watch, even if he's not a guy who comes to mind when I think of who's your favorite filmmaker, but I really love his movies.
I think there's something to be said for like, there's a reason he's so many people's introductory director, because his movies are so like, there's such mass appeal. They're kind of for everyone, but they still have all these like very meticulous qualities that are rewarding on rewatch and further study. And just his ability to have it both ways. I do think the closest comparison is Spielberg.
I was gonna say, yeah, is that the right guy to bring up?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Because they are both these like great entertainers who do have ability to like transcend that and make great art, but first and foremost they are great at doing the blockbuster filmmaking for an audience.
Yeah, especially earlier when you guys were mentioning this idea, like he's always grappling with that emotion, the masses, but then he's also kind of like a scientist. And then obviously all the retroactives with Spielberg, especially after Fabelmans, is this idea of like, yeah, the dude with the mother who was an artist and the father who was a scientist. You kind of see those battling out in every one of his movies, and going through an entire bracket of Nolan kind of has the same thing. So I could definitely see that. He's the gateway director for a lot of people.
Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Well, it's a lot of fun to talk about Christopher Nolan with the both of you and Karsten as well, who we enjoyed talking with. Yeah, he's gone to the Doodlebug dimension or something like that. Taylor, what you got going on? Are you uploading Scratch Off anytime soon? What should we look forward to?
So my NYU thesis film, Scratch Off, is gonna hit the internet one of these days, probably in the next week or so. Possibly by the time this is uploaded. If so, I'll send you the link if you want to include that in the description. For sure. That's the main thing I've got going on right now. Obviously, still doing just the regular YouTube stuff. I don't really have a consistent schedule, but I'll have something out sometime soon. Yeah, that's it from me.
Always looking forward to your uploads. Yeah, I really loved your Asteroid City one recently as well. So definitely people should check that out. Arturo, where can people find more from you?
You can find me over at LME Movies on Twitter, YouTube, Letterboxd, all that good stuff. X, sorry. Or every week here on the Intercut Podcast.
Yeah, I'm Zshevich on Twitter and various social medias, and at Multiplex Show on YouTube and TikTok. And you can find every episode of the Intercut Podcast here on YouTube or streaming on various podcatchers as well. We upload new episodes every Monday, and be sure to head over to Apple Music, iTunes, whatever you want to call it, to give us that much requested 5-star review. Also follow our various social media platforms at Intercut Pod, where you can get updates throughout the week from Arturo, from Taylor, from me, from all the guests that we feature here on Intercut, maybe Karsten as well. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, I'll see you at the beginning, friend. That's the quote that I was trying to reference earlier. Yeah.